The notification pinged at 2:17 a.m. Sharp and unapologetic, yanking Ezra out of a restless dream. He blinked at his phone, the glow burning his eyes as he read, "You've got a new match on FretConnect." A guitar app, of all things, pairing him with someone named Caleb, whose profile picture showed a guy with a lopsided grin, strumming a beat-up acoustic under a street lamp. Ezra groaned, tossing his phone onto the tangled sheets of his Seattle apartment. He wasn't looking for a mentor, let alone a match. FretConnect was supposed to be about learning chords, not sparking connections. He'd signed up on a whim, desperate to fill the silence of his evenings after moving to the city, chasing a music career that felt more like a fading echo. At 24, Ezra was a bundle of nerves, awkward, wiry, with brown hair that never stayed in place and a heart that bruised too easily. He'd always hidden behind his sketchbook, doodling lyrics he never dared sing. Music was his escape, but sharing it with a stranger, that was a risk he hadn't signed up for. By morning, curiosity won. Caleb's profile was sparse but magnetic. 25. Seattle. Loves late-night jam sessions and coffee that tastes like regret. His song list included Radiohead, Bon Iver, and some obscure indie tracks Ezra secretly adored. Against his better judgment, Ezra typed, "Hey, think the app glitched. I'm not exactly pro-level." Caleb's reply came in minutes. "No glitch. You said you like Holocene. Let's start there." Their first virtual lesson was a disaster. Ezra's fingers fumbled on his guitar strings, his webcam stuttering as he tried to follow Caleb's patient strumming over Zoom. Caleb, with his warm hazel eyes and easy laugh, didn't seem to mind. "You're not terrible," he teased, leaning closer to the screen. "Just aggressively enthusiastic." Ezra flushed, unsure if it was the critique or Caleb's grin that set his pulse racing. Over the next few weeks, their sessions became a ritual. Caleb taught Ezra chords, but it was the stories between the notes that hooked him. Caleb shared tales of busking on Pike Place, his dreams of composing for films, and the way music had pulled him through a rough childhood in foster care. Ezra, usually guarded, found himself opening up about his own fears failing as a musician, disappointing his parents, who still hoped he'd get a real job. He didn't mention the deeper fear that he'd never belong, not in Seattle, not in his own skin. Growing up in a small Idaho town, Ezra had buried his attraction to men, terrified of what it meant. Now, in this city of rain and reinvention, Caleb's voice felt like a lifeline. One evening, Caleb suggested they meet in person. "There's a coffee shop on Capitol Hill," he said, his voice casual but laced with something heavier. "Bring your guitar. Let's jam." Ezra's stomach twisted. Online, he could hide his nerves behind a screen. In person, he'd be exposed raw, clumsy, real. The coffee shop was a warm blur of fairy lights and worn wooden tables. Caleb was already there, his guitar case propped against a chair, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal a tattoo of a music staff curling around his forearm. He looked up as Ezra walked in, and his smile was so unguarded it made Ezra's chest ache. "You made it," Caleb said, like it was a victory. They played for hours, their guitars weaving melodies that drew curious glances from other patrons. Ezra's fingers, usually clumsy, found a rhythm, guided by Caleb's quiet encouragement. Between songs, they talked about music, dreams, the way Seattle's rain made everything feel like a second chance. Caleb's knee brushed Ezra's under the table, accidental but electric, and Ezra froze, his heart hammering. He wanted to lean into it, to let the moment stretch, but fear clamped down hard. What if he was reading this wrong? What if Caleb was just being kind? As the night ended, Caleb handed Ezra a napkin with a scribbled chord progression. "For next time," he said, his eyes lingering. Ezra clutched it like a secret, unaware that this was only the beginning melody that would unravel them both. The rain was relentless the next day, mirroring Ezra's spiraling thoughts. He sat in his tiny apartment, the napkin from Caleb smoothed out on his desk, its ink smudged but sacred. He hadn't slept, replaying that knee brush, Caleb's laugh, the way his hazel eyes seemed to see straight through him. Was it just a jam session, or was there something more? Ezra wasn't ready to name the warmth spreading in his chest, but it terrified him as much as it thrilled him. Their next meeting was at a park near Lake Union, where Caleb insisted they play outdoors despite the drizzle. Music sounds better with a little chaos, he said, shaking water from his hair. Ezra laughed, surprised by how easy it felt to be around him. They sat under a tree, guitars balanced on their knees, trading riffs and stories. Caleb's fingers moved with a confidence Ezra envied, each note deliberate, like he was pouring his soul into the strings. "You're getting better," Caleb said, nudging Ezra's shoulder. "Less like you're wrestling the guitar now." Ezra rolled his eyes, but the praise lit him up. He wanted to be good not just at music, but for Caleb. The thought made his cheeks burn, and he ducked his head, pretending to focus on his chords. That night, Caleb texted, "Want to try writing a song together?" Ezra stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply. Collaboration meant vulnerability, letting Caleb into the messy corners of his heart where half-formed lyrics lived. But saying no felt like closing a door he wasn't ready to shut. Their songwriting sessions began over Zoom, then spilled into late-night meetups at Caleb's cramped studio apartment. It was a cluttered space filled with vinyl records, fairy lights, and a couch that smelled faintly of coffee. Caleb's energy was infectious. Hum a melody, scribble a lyric, then lean close to show Ezra a new chord, their shoulders brushing. Each touch felt like a question Ezra wasn't ready to answer. One night, as they worked on a chorus about longing and second chances, Caleb's voice softened. "You ever feel like you're running from something, but you don't know what?" Ezra froze, his pen stalling on the page. He wanted to say yes, to confess the weight of his unspoken feelings, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he nodded, and Caleb's hand rested on his for a moment. Warm, steady, gone too soon. By the end of the first month, their song was taking shape, a haunting blend of folk and indie that felt like their story woven into sound. But Ezra's feelings were a tangle of hope and fear. He'd never been in love, never let himself imagine it, especially not with a man. Caleb was out, unapologetically himself, while Ezra was still hiding, even from himself. Every lesson, every glance, felt like a step toward a truth he wasn't sure he could face. Ezra's days began to orbit around Caleb. Mornings were for sketching in his notebook, lyrics inspired by Caleb's laugh or the way his fingers danced on the guitar. Afternoons were for work at the bookstore, where he'd sneak glances at his phone, hoping for a text. Nights were for Caleb, whether online or in person. Their connection grew, fragile but undeniable. One evening, Caleb invited Ezra to a local open mic night. "You're ready," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Ezra's stomach churned. Performing was Caleb's world, not his. He'd spent years avoiding attention, blending into the background. But Caleb's belief in him was a spark he couldn't ignore. The venue was a dive bar packed with hipsters and dreamers, the air thick with cigarette smoke and anticipation. Caleb went first, his performance raw and captivating, his voice carrying a quiet strength that silenced the room. Ezra watched, mesmerized, as Caleb sang about love and loss, his eyes flickering to Ezra on the last verse. The crowd erupted, but all Ezra could hear was his own heartbeat. When it was his turn, Ezra's hands shook as he stepped onto the stage. The spotlight felt like a judgment, exposing every insecurity. He strummed the opening chords of their song, his voice cracking at first, then steadying as he found Caleb's gaze in the crowd. Caleb nodded, a small gesture that felt like an anchor. Ezra sang, pouring his fear and longing into the words they'd written together. When he finished, the applause was deafening, but it was Caleb's proud smile that made his chest swell. Afterward, they sat outside on a curb, sharing a cigarette neither of them really wanted. "You were incredible," Caleb said, his voice soft but fervent. Ezra shrugged, embarrassed, but Caleb grabbed his hand, holding it longer than necessary. "I mean it. Easy. You've got something real." The nickname hit like a chord, resonant and warm. Ezra wanted to hold on to that moment, to freeze it before doubt could creep in. But doubt was relentless. At home, Ezra's phone buzzed with a message from his mom. "When are you coming back to Idaho? This music thing isn't stable." The word stung, a reminder of the expectations he'd fled. He hadn't told his parents about Caleb, about the feelings he was only beginning to name. How could he, when he wasn't sure what this was? A friendship? A crush? Something more? Their next meeting was at Caleb's apartment, where they polished their song. The air felt charged, every glance heavy with meaning. As they played, Caleb's knee pressed against Ezra's, deliberate this time. Ezra's breath hitched, and he set his guitar down, unable to focus. "What are we doing?" he blurted, his voice raw. Caleb's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of hesitation. "What do you want us to be doing?" he asked, leaning closer. Ezra's heart raced, torn between running and staying. He wanted to kiss Caleb, to close the distance, but fear held him back. Instead, he mumbled, "I don't know," and the moment slipped away. The tension lingered, unspoken but palpable. They kept meeting, kept playing, but Ezra felt the weight of his indecision. Caleb was patient, but Ezra could see the questions in his eyes, the hope he was too scared to mirror. One night, Caleb shared a story about his first love, a boy from high school who'd broken his heart. "I thought I'd never feel that way again," Caleb said, his gaze locked on Ezra. "But then I met you." Ezra's throat tightened. He wanted to say it back, to admit that Caleb was rewriting every rule he'd ever known about himself. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he changed the subject, and Caleb's smile faltered, just for a moment. By the end of the second month, their song was nearly complete, but Ezra felt like he was unraveling. He was falling for Caleb, hard and fast, but the fear of what that meant of coming out, of risking rejection, of appending his life kept him silent. Every note they played together felt like a confession he wasn't ready to make. The Seattle rain turned brutal in November, matching the storm in Ezra's head. He and Caleb were closer than ever, their lives intertwined through music and late-night talks. But the unspoken tension between them was a tightrope. Ezra felt it every time their hands brushed, every time Caleb's laugh made his heart skip. He was falling, and it scared him senseless. One chilly evening, Caleb suggested they busk together at Pike Place Market. "It'll be fun," he said, his eyes bright with mischief. Ezra hesitated. Playing in public was one thing, but busking felt like baring his soul to strangers. Still, he couldn't say no to Caleb. They set up near the fish stalls, guitars tuned, a small crowd gathering as Caleb's voice rang out, clear and bold. Ezra joined in, his nerves fading as their harmonies blended, drawing smiles and coins from passers-by. A woman tossed $1 into their guitar case, her eyes lingering on them. "You two are adorable together," she said, winking. Ezra's face burned, and he glanced at Caleb, expecting a laugh. But Caleb just grinned, his gaze soft and unreadable. "Thanks," he said, and Ezra's heart did a somersault. That night, they grabbed burgers at a diner, their laughter filling the booth. Caleb reached across the table, stealing a fry from Ezra's plate, his fingers grazing Ezra's. "You were fearless out there," Caleb said. "I'm proud of you." Ezra wanted to bottle that moment, the warmth, the ease, the way Caleb made him feel like he could be enough. But the ease didn't last. At home, Ezra's phone lit up with a voicemail from his dad. "Your mom's worried about you, Ezra. This city's changing you." The words cut deep, stirring memories of his childhood, of whispered arguments about normal and right. He hadn't come out to his parents, hadn't even come out to himself fully. The idea of loving Caleb off, admitting it felt like stepping off a cliff. Their next session was at a community center, where Caleb volunteered to teach music to kids. Ezra watched him with a group of shy teenagers, his patience and humor coaxing smiles from even the quietest. One kid, a lanky boy named Sam, lingered after class, confessing he was scared to tell his parents he was gay. Caleb listened, his voice steady as he shared his own story of coming out at 17, of finding freedom in being himself. Ezra stood frozen, his heart pounding. He wanted that freedom, but the fear was a wall he couldn't climb. Later, as they walked through the city, Caleb's mood was heavier. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching Ezra's. Ezra nodded, but the lie felt sour. He wanted to tell Caleb everything, how he felt, how he was terrified, how he didn't know how to be brave. But instead, he said, "Just tired," and Caleb's silence felt like a wound. The breaking point came at a rooftop party hosted by one of Caleb's friends. The view of Seattle's skyline was breathtaking, but Ezra felt out of place among the confident, openly queer crowd. Caleb fit right in, laughing and charming everyone. Ezra stood on the sidelines, clutching a beer, until Caleb pulled him into a slow dance under the string lights. Their bodies were close, Caleb's hand warm on Ezra's waist, his breath soft against Ezra's ear. "You don't have to hide with me," Caleb whispered. Ezra's chest tightened. He wanted to stay in that moment, to let go of the fear, but his mind screamed warnings about his family, his past, the unknown. He pulled away, mumbling an excuse, and fled to the stairwell, his breath ragged. Caleb followed, his voice gentle but firm. "Ezra, talk to me. What's going on?" "I can't," Ezra choked out. I'm not like you." The words hung heavy, and Caleb's face fell, a mix of hurt and understanding. "You don't have to be," he said quietly, "but you have to be honest with yourself." Ezra left the party alone, the city's lights blurring through his tears. He was losing Caleb, losing himself, and he didn't know how to stop it. Ezra spent the next week avoiding Caleb's texts, each unanswered message a stab of guilt. He threw himself into work at the bookstore, shelving novels about love and courage he didn't feel. At night, he strummed his guitar alone, the chords sounding hollow without Caleb's harmony. He missed his voice, his laugh, the way he made Ezra feel seen. But admitting that meant facing the truth about himself, and Ezra wasn't ready. One evening, he wandered into a queer bookstore in Capitol Hill, drawn by a rainbow flag in the window. The shelves were lined with stories of people like him, people who'd fought for their truth, who'd found love despite fear. He bought a memoir on impulse, its pages filled with raw, honest accounts of coming out. Reading it felt like a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he'd buried. Caleb finally cornered him at the coffee shop where they'd first played together. Ezra was there, sketching in his notebook, when Caleb slid into the seat across from him. "You've been ghosting me," Caleb said, his tone light, but his eyes serious. Ezra's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "It's not you." "Then what is it?" Caleb leaned forward, his voice low. "I thought we had something. Ezra. Am I wrong?" The question hung between them, heavy and urgent. Ezra wanted to say no, to confess that Caleb was everything he wanted but was too scared to claim. Instead, he said, "I need time." Caleb nodded, but the hurt in his eyes was unmistakable. "I'll wait," he said, "but not forever." He left, and Ezra felt the weight of his absence like a missing cord. The turning point came at a gig Caleb had booked for them at a small club. Ezra almost bailed, but the thought of letting Caleb down again was unbearable. He showed up, guitar in hand, his nerves a live wire. The club was packed, the stage small but intimidating. Caleb was already there, tuning his guitar, his expression guarded but warm when he saw Ezra. They played their song, the one they'd written together, and it was electric. The crowd swayed, caught in the raw emotion of their voices blending, their guitars in perfect sync. For those 4 minutes, Ezra forgot his fear, forgot the world outside. It was just him and Caleb, creating something beautiful. After the set, they stepped outside, the night air cool against their flushed skin. "You showed up," Caleb said, a small smile breaking through. Ezra took a shaky breath. "I'm trying," he said. I'm figuring it out." Caleb's hand found his, tentative but firm. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. That night, Ezra went home and wrote in his notebook not lyrics, but a letter to himself. He wrote about his fear, his shame, the boy he'd been and the man he wanted to be. He wrote about Caleb, about the way he made Ezra feel brave. It wasn't a full confession, but it was a start. Their next meeting was at a quiet beach near Alki Point. The water was gray, the sky heavy with clouds, but Caleb's presence was a burst of color. They played softly, their guitars blending with the waves. Ezra felt the words bubbling up, the ones he'd been too scared to say. "I like you," he blurted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just scared." Caleb's smile was soft, unguarded. "I like you too," he said. "And I'm scared sometimes, too." He reached for Ezra's hand, and this time, Ezra didn't pull away. They sat there, fingers intertwined, the world quiet except for the sound of their breathing and the distant crash of waves. Ezra's confession was a crack in the dam, letting feelings flood through he'd held back for years. He and Caleb were something now not quite defined, but real. They spent more time together, not just playing music, but exploring Seattle's corners record stores, food trucks, hidden parks. Each moment with Caleb felt like a step toward accepting himself, but the fear lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. One night, they went to a queer open mic event, where performers shared poetry and songs about love and identity. Ezra watched, heart pounding, as a trans woman sang about finding her truth. Caleb squeezed his hand under the table, and Ezra realized he wasn't alone in this journey. After the event, they walked through the city, the streets alive with possibility. "You ever think about performing solo?" Caleb asked. Ezra shook his head. "I'm not brave like you." Caleb stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're braver than you think," he said. "You're here, with me. That's not nothing." Ezra's chest tightened, a mix of gratitude and longing. He wanted to believe Caleb, to believe in himself. But reality intruded. Ezra's parents called, their voices heavy with concern. "We're coming to visit," his mom said. "We want to see what's keeping you in Seattle." Panic gripped Ezra. He hadn't told them about Caleb, about the person he was becoming. The thought of their disapproval of losing their love was paralyzing. He pulled back from Caleb, canceling sessions, claiming he was busy. Caleb sensed the shift, his texts growing shorter, his voice quieter. One evening, he showed up at Ezra's apartment, unannounced. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes searching. You're shutting me out again. Ezra's voice cracked as he admitted the truth. My parents are coming. They don't know. About me. About us. Caleb's expression softened, but there was a flicker of frustration. You can't keep hiding. Ezra, he said. Not from them. Not from yourself. The visit was a disaster. Ezra's parents arrived, their small-town values clashing with Seattle's vibrant diversity. They questioned his music, his job, his life. At dinner, when Ezra mentioned Caleb as a friend, his mom's eyes narrowed. You're different here, she said, her tone sharp. Ezra felt like he was suffocating. After they left, he went to Caleb's apartment, needing his warmth. Caleb listened as Ezra poured out his fears about his parents, about losing them, about not being enough. Caleb pulled him close, his arm steady. You're enough, he whispered. You've always been enough. They kissed for the first time that night, tentative at first, then fierce, like they were making up for lost time. It was messy and perfect, and Ezra felt like he was finally breathing. But the high didn't last. The next day, a text from his dad, "We're worried about you. Come home for Christmas." The invitation felt like a summons, a test he wasn't sure he could pass. Ezra and Caleb kept working on their song, but the tension between them grew. Caleb was patient, but Ezra could see the strain in his eyes, the unspoken question of whether Ezra would ever fully choose him. One night, as they played, Caleb set his guitar down. I can't keep doing this halfway, he said. I need to know you're in. Ezra's heart broke at the words. He wanted to be in, more than anything. But the weight of his past, his family, his fear, it was too much. He left Caleb's apartment without a word, the silence between them louder than any song they'd ever played. Ezra's world felt like it was crumbling. He stopped going to the coffee shop, stopped playing his guitar, stopped answering Caleb's texts. The silence was deafening, but he didn't know how to break it. He spent hours staring at the napkin Caleb had given him that first night, its chords a reminder of what he was losing. One evening, he wandered into a record store, seeking solace in the familiar. He found a Bon Iver album, the one Caleb loved, and bought it on impulse. At home, he played it, letting the music wash over him. It was like hearing Caleb's voice, raw and real, pulling him back to the moments they'd shared. He called Caleb, his hands shaking as the phone rang. I'm sorry, he said when Caleb answered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm scared, but I don't want to lose you. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then said, Come over. Let's talk. At Caleb's apartment, Ezra poured out everything: his fear of disappointing his parents, his struggle to accept himself, his love for Caleb that he'd been too afraid to name. Caleb listened, his eyes never leaving Ezra's. I'm not asking you to have all the answers, Caleb said. I just want you to try. They spent the night talking, then playing, their guitars filling the room with a new melody, one of forgiveness, of hope. Ezra felt lighter, like he was shedding the weight of years of hiding. When Caleb kissed him, it felt like a promise, one Ezra was starting to believe he could keep. Christmas loomed, and Ezra knew he couldn't go back to Idaho without being honest. He wrote his parents a letter, his hands trembling as he typed the words, I'm gay. I'm in love with someone. His name is Caleb. He didn't send it. Not yet. But writing it felt like a step toward freedom. He and Caleb performed their song at another open mic, this time with a new verse about courage. The crowd loved it, but Ezra's eyes were on Caleb, on the way he shone under the lights. After, they walked through the city, hand in hand, the cold air sharp but their connection warm. But the letter to his parents weighed on Ezra. He showed it to Caleb, expecting judgment. But Caleb just hugged him. You don't have to send it now, he said. But when you're ready, I'll be here. Ezra nodded, tears in his eyes. For the first time, he felt like he could be enough not just for Caleb, but for himself. Their song was finished, a testament to their journey. They recorded it in Caleb's apartment, their voices blending in a way that felt like magic. Ezra posted it online, a small act of bravery that felt monumental. The response was overwhelming comments from strangers who felt seen, who found hope in their words. As the year ended, Ezra stood at a crossroads. He could go back to Idaho, face his parents, and risk their rejection. Or he could stay in Seattle, build a life with Caleb, and embrace the person he was becoming. The choice wasn't easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to make it. Ezra sent the letter to his parents the day before New Year's Eve. His hands shook as he hit send, the words burning in his mind. I'm gay. I'm in love with someone. His name is Caleb. He didn't know what to expect: anger, silence, maybe acceptance. The waiting was agony, but Caleb was there, his presence a steady anchor. They spent New Year's Eve at a small concert hall, where they'd been invited to perform their song as part of a local showcase. The stage was bigger than any they'd played before, the crowd a sea of unfamiliar faces. Ezra's nerves were electric, but Caleb's hand on his shoulder grounded him. We've got this, Caleb whispered, and Ezra believed him. Their performance was raw, powerful, their voices carrying the weight of their journey. The crowd stood, cheering, and Ezra felt a rush of pride not just for the music, but for the courage it took to stand there, unapologetically himself. After, Caleb pulled him into a hug, their guitars still slung over their shoulders. You're incredible, Caleb said, and Ezra kissed him, right there in front of everyone, the fear melting away. His parents' response came the next day. It wasn't what he'd hoped, but it wasn't what he'd feared, either. We need time, his mom wrote. We love you, but this is hard for us. The words stung, but they were a start. Ezra showed the email to Caleb, who read it quietly, then squeezed his hand. They'll come around, he said. Or they won't. But you've got me. Ezra started therapy, a step he'd avoided for years. Talking about his fears, his past, his identity. It was hard, but it helped. He and Caleb kept writing music, their songs a lifeline through the uncertainty. They moved in together, a small apartment filled with guitars and dreams. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, doubts, moments when Ezra's fear crept back, but it was theirs. One spring evening, they played their song at a Pride event in Seattle. The crowd was vibrant, a sea of rainbow flags and open hearts. Ezra looked out at them, then at Caleb, and felt a sense of belonging he'd never known. Their music was more than notes. No, it was a story of love, of courage, of finding home in each other. Ezra's parents called a few months later. The conversation was awkward, halting, but they wanted to try. We want to meet Caleb, his dad said, his voice strained but sincere. Ezra cried after hanging up, a mix of relief and hope. Caleb held him, his arms a safe harbor. Their song went viral online, shared by queer communities across the country. Strangers reached out, saying it had given them courage, helped them feel seen. Ezra read their messages, tears in his eyes, and realized this was bigger than him, bigger than them. Their music was a beacon, a reminder that love could be messy but worth fighting for. Summer in Seattle brought long days and warm nights, and Ezra and Caleb's life together bloomed. They played gigs across the city, their music a thread connecting them to each other and the world. Ezra's confidence grew, not just as a musician, but as a man who loved openly, unashamedly. Caleb was his partner, his muse, his home. One evening, they sat on their apartment's balcony, guitars in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in pinks and golds. They played their song, the one that had started it all, its chords now as familiar as their own heartbeats. We got matched by mistake, Caleb said, grinning. Best mistake ever. Ezra laughed, leaning into him. You're still playing with my heart. You know. Caleb kissed him, soft and sure. Good, he said. I plan to keep playing it for a long time. Ezra's parents visited that fall. The meeting was tense at first, their small-town discomfort palpable in the city's vibrant chaos. But Caleb's warmth, his easy charm, softened them. They didn't fully understand. Not yet. But they listened as Ezra and Caleb played their song, their voices blending in a way that felt like truth. His mom's eyes glistened, and his dad offered a quiet nod. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Their song became an anthem for others, a reminder that love could be found in unexpected places, even in the glitch of a guitar app. Ezra and Caleb kept writing, kept performing, their music a celebration of who they were and who they were becoming. They faced challenges, doubts, fears, the world's harsh edges, but they faced them together. One night, at a quiet cafe gig, Ezra took the mic alone. He'd written a new verse, one he hadn't shown Caleb. It was about love, about courage, about choosing yourself even when it's hard. As he sang, Caleb's eyes shone with pride, with love, with the promise of a future they'd build together. The song ended, and the crowd cheered, but Ezra's world was Caleb's smile. They'd been matched by mistake, but they'd chosen each other on purpose. And in that choice, Ezra found his voice, his truth, his home. Their story wasn't over, it was a melody still unfolding, full of hope and possibility. They'd keep playing, keep loving, keep fighting for the life they'd found. And somewhere, in the notes of their song, was the truth that love, however it begins, is always worth the risk.